Welcome, everyone, to this first session of our closing program for collective practices that is concluding 8 months of program where we have explored, discussed, and experienced how we can get better at practicing collectivity over very many different projects and with different artists, organizers, and activists, in an open and organically unfolding process that was shaped by so many different contributions. And now this closing program brings different threads together. Today, on the first day, we'll present some last chapters of series and artists that we've been working with over the past year. And tomorrow, we'll discuss some meta questions of collective practice. We'll talk about concepts of relating, such as solidarity, care, and collective organizing. And then on day 3, on Friday, I look very much forward to this because we bring together all the different participants that have been part of collective practices for roundtable exchanges with each other, and that's finally a chance where everybody can meet each other and where we can bring related threads together and in resonance with each other. And this will also be public, so an audience, you can come and listen in, and it's, I think, a good opportunity to catch up on what has been happening for the past year. And I'm introducing this conference, those 3 days alone, but so this is not really in the spirit of collective practice. So I would like to mention the team here and say thank you to everyone, the core team, Daniela, Chinwe, Olga, Inga, and then on communication and design, Diane, Lucas, Vara, and Julie, and tech organization, Rana, Turi, Simone, Stephanie, all participating artists and projects, and to the Hauptstadt Kulturfonds for the funding so that we all were able to make all those collective experiments and connections. And now to this session. I'm super happy that it's happening. Consent of the governed, race, constitution, and KINK. One thematic thread that has emerged in collective practices has been on perspectives, marginalized and hegemonic systems of knowledge and discourse, and also legal systems, as we talk about today, and looking to create counter-narratives collectively, making perspectives visible, and also collectively empower each other. And this is the second part of our collaboration with Delhi-based artists and activist Vidisha. I was super happy to have met Vidisha through our open call, as their work resonates so much with what we are working on and also what we had in mind with collective practices. And as everything had moved online, we could just start working together, these days it doesn't really matter so much if you're next door or in Delhi. And so just to introduce Vidisha, and then they will introduce all the other participants of this session. Vidisha works as an artist curator across arts and cultural disciplines. They focus on collaborations, collectives, and experiences as a norm-critical pedagogy to queer hegemonies. And one of their projects is Party Office. It's an anti-caste, trans-feminist art and social space, and it investigates the commons through intersectional inquiries, dialogues, and celebration towards critical future publics. We have already completed a project with Vidisha in the summer. That was the Sol to Sol meal, which we were lucky to do outside in the Akut backyard, cooking together with a group of people on the hottest day of the year. And we cooked the same recipe in Delhi and Berlin and exchanged about knowledges of small-scale growing of plants, cooking, composting, and waste, and how all those topics also relate to caste, class, race, and hegemonic systems of knowledge. And for this second project, Vidisha has joined up with Shaunak Mahbubani, and they're both part of the After Party Collective. And this publication and conversation project is organized by Party Office and After Party Collective, and Vidisha and Shaunak, that I will hand over to In a second, we'll take over for the introduction of the topic and all participants. Really quick, you can ask questions. You can put them in the chat and on YouTube and Facebook, wherever you're watching, and we'll take them from there. We also have a Telegram group that runs in parallel through all the 3 days. And also Vidisha and maybe also some of the other participants will be available also after the session in the Telegram channel for you to discuss the topic further for a little bit. And so I would like to hand over to Vidisha and Shaunak.
Hi. Thank you, Tiona, Dhrubo, and Akynos for your work and becoming a part of this very dear exploration and for being present today. Thank you, Andrea, Olga, and all the team of Collective Practices and ACUD in supporting this work and hosting us from afar. Thank you, Shaunak, for becoming a co-editor and for making me make meaning of these inquiries and relations every day. As Andrea already introduced Party Office, I'd just go further. Within global and local contexts, radicalized and marginalized bodies are those that have been subjected to hegemonic oppression and suffer under direct institutional and cultural forms of violence. We believe that affective countering by queering hegemony must include consciousness of class, caste, race, gender, sexuality, and forms of segregation or othering present within the socio-political techno-landscapes of India and the world. Party is a political group with certain ideologies and agendas. Party is an act which seems to be only a leisure activity, rather becomes a site for building relationships, friendships, thinking together, and to be able to do nothing in a safe company. Office is a place of work. It is an architecture where work is performed. Office here is interested to deconstruct gendered organizational methods, to reconsider how we approach work and occupation through queer anarchist positions. Party Office opened last year on the 22nd January 2020. We did a few international collaborations and commissioned several artists and activists through the pandemic, and will be celebrating a year with the upcoming panel of Collective Practices day after. We have previously curated Soil to Soil Meal with Collective Practices. That was a collaboration with Aru as the Millet Kitchen, a home and a kitchen in Jaipur, India, that presents a model for sustainable living, practicing urban farming, supporting ethical food sources, including small farmers and indigenous communities, and promotes millets and biodiversity on the plate. Our upcoming publication, Consent of the Governed, Race, Constitution and KINK, for which we are gathered here, is edited with the After Party Collective. After Party Collective, formed by Shaunak Mahbubani and myself, acts in the intersection between curatorial and performance practices. Expanding the party as a site for critical praxis, we produce spaces of embodied thinking to create momentum towards affirmation of trans, intersex, non-binary, gender non-conforming, and polygendered bodies. Through our projects, we hope we are able to energize choreographies of collectivity, agency, legality, and pleasure. Thank you again to all the audiences who are present. Without further ado, I would like to share a video which we commissioned as a part of a curatorial What Remains as Memory for Nottingham Arts Mela in August 2020. The video work titled Before the Law is by Kochi-based artist-curator Arya Krishnan R, performed at the Sweet Maria Monument, which is an artistic memorial in tribute to the memory of Sweet Maria, a transgender activist who was brutally murdered on the 10th of May 2012 in a home in Kollam in Kerala, India. We can have the video, Rana.
No, it is not a dream. It isn't. I'm in this festival. I'm dreaming. Must be a dream. But I woke up. There is this man. There is this man. For 20 years. For 20 dark years. I'm in love with him. I love him, no matter what. So he was lying in the room. He's lying in this room. There are two identical beds. There is one bed here, and there is another bed on the other side of the room, and it's like two beds. It's a hostel room. It's a hospital room. Two beds. He was lying in this hostel kind of room, and I didn't go there to marry him, but I had a garland. I think I wanted to marry him. They started a campaign. They started a campaign for, now gay people can marry now, trans people can marry now, everyone else, Muslims can marry, Dalits can marry, intercaste, interreligious. It's for everybody. It's for everybody's marriage. Now that gays can, after the campaign is over, when it's going to be successful, gays can marry. So all of us could marry, queer, intercaste, any religion, etc., etc. So this garland I had, there is this man. There is this man, and there is this lover under his pillow. And was he his pillow? There are these lovers under his bed, and there is his entire family in the closet. Everyone, all his family. He was a family man. And I said, family, I went to marry him. Because the law says so. Law says, no, the law is going to say we can marry. We can marry each other. Gay men can marry. I want to marry. I want to marry him. I don't know, I'm not sure. I didn't say I want to marry. After all, he is a family man. He is a family man. After all, we both have so many lovers around. All I wanted was to bury my face in his crotch. All I wanted was to marry. All I wanted was to bury. All I wanted to was bury my face in his pink pajamas. No, it's a dream I never had. I was scrolling through Insta. I remember before my sleep I was scrolling through Instagram. I saw his pictures with his wife and his grandkids. They were holidaying in Kodaikanal. I saw someone demanding marriage rights. I saw some posts. I saw someone posting about equality, marriage equality for gay people. I saw Vikram Ram contemplating on his love. I saw Atul Kakar poems. No, it's not a dream. I saw it all for real before I slept. It was all there. It was all like pages I was scrolling through. What was it? No. Free Natasha. Free Devangana Kalita. Free Rona Wilson. It's not a dream. Freedom. After all, I just wanted to marry him. No. Freedom. Free all of them. Free me. Free all of us.
It's not, this video is called Before the Law, which is made by Arya Krishnan, as mentioned earlier. Within quotes, it's not possible for me to dehumanize someone who believes in racial supremacy or caste supremacy. When I'm the one who has the reins in their hand, they are relinquishing their control to me. It's actually an act of me humanizing them. Quotes closed, says artist, curator, organizer Aro Akunt in a conversation we had on Kink and Cast last year in August 2020. Aro says further that kink argues for the dirty, So, and if so, it should also argue anti-caste. I feel the pain when you say, I'm here, I'm choosing you, as if I don't deserve it. It's about what I feel belonging to. I feel alienation in acceptance. I feel alienation in becoming a family who celebrates together. I want the celebration of us. I need the celebration of us together. But it worries me that my trauma is unable to leave my body, and I don't have control over when do I pain you. I need you to know this joy is new to me, and I don't know how to absorb it. But you should know I'm here. I'm choosing you. Those who suggest neutrality of the Constitution usually find affirmation within dominant culture. When one sees history of decriminalization of Section 377 in India, we see how from a case that would provide for HIV/AIDS healthcare to the largely affected queer community becomes about decolonizing oneself from a Judeo-Christian morale, eventually an elite judiciary victory for the freedom of sexual union. The celebrities have further petitioned for a culturally accepted endogamous same-sex marriage, so-called equality. The Aryan Brahminic Hindu supremacy not only fetishizes the sacred cow and the temple, but also the social structure of such endogamous marriage. The gay liberation, when tries to fulfill that fetish of this nation state, it is no more denied its citizenship. Grace Banu, technologist and a Dalit transgender rights activist from Tamil Nadu, India, writes this in a letter with regards to the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Bill 2016. Text translated from Tamil by Mauli. To the President and the Prime Minister of India, we, the transgender people of India, the children of this independent land, who have been disowned by our families, by the government, and have been made refugees in our own land. I am writing this with the sweat and blood of transgender community and request you to at least euthanize me. The Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Bill 2016 has lost the essence of the Indian democracy and targets the transgender community with its toxic policies. We are suffering in between life and death due to your toxicity. It is far better to die rather than to wander in between life and death. So please euthanize us. Party Office and After Party Collective invite Tiona, Nekkia, McClodden, Latoya Rule, the incredible edible Akynos, Dhrubo Jyoti to contribute for our upcoming publication, Consent of the Governed, Race, Constitution and KINK. Since Latoya is not present, I wanted to share an excerpt from their text. Latoya Rule, who isn't present today, writes, for me personally, to accept the state to charge itself for the deaths that are required for the state to progress its genocidal project is senseless. To expect the state to dismantle itself is unwise. It is the question of how we, as sovereign peoples across the world, engage in dismantling the institutions that support Aboriginal deaths in custody, and beyond that, I'm more so interested in addressing that I am more so interested in addressing. We don't deserve to front the cost of the murders of our loved ones. And just for the record, my mom said she might deduct the $1,000 bill she received from the rent that's 200 plus years overdue. Latoya Rule is a queer, non-binary Aboriginal and Maori person residing in Gadigal Land, Sydney. They work as a university educator, researcher, and are undertaking their PhD in the University of Technology, Sydney, on women and non-binary people's fight against the murders of Aboriginal people in custody in Australia. And now I would like to invite Tiona, Nekkia, McClauden, who is a visual artist, filmmaker, and curator whose work explores and critiques issues at the intersections of race, gender, sexuality, and social commentary. McClodden's interdisciplinary approach towards his documentary film, experimental video, sculpture, and sound installation. Themes explored in McClodden's films and works have been rememory and more recently narrative biomythography. Tiona, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Tiona, Nekkia, McClauden, pronouns are she and her. Very, very excited to be a part of this offering and sharing and hopefully conversation. I'm coming out of Philadelphia right now. It's the morning. This morning for me is really like, I think dominated right now with the news and just in terms of like what is going on with the climate of the city with this transition of presidential power. So it was very important, and I have framed my little offering and conversation, or yeah, as a kind, I've kind of done something that is basically pulling from some of the themes that I'm going to be writing about for the actual publication, in relationship to how I feel in regards to the determination of trying to center myself and dealing with ideas of power within my own body, personhood, despite the larger conversation that is happening. So the actual my presentation contains some like stills. I don't know if they're going to be able to play, but from works of mine that deal with various aspects of power, more specifically submission and dominance within my own body. And are you all able to hear me? You good? Okay, within my own body and personhood. So what I've done, because this is like ultimately going to be like a pretty medium-sized essay, is I've created just some excerpts that I kind of want to wax poetic on. This is something that I do personally with friends, and more recently have started to do it with myself. So I'm just going to go down the list. The stills do not correlate to any of the any kind of order, so they can play at random. So the language that I sent around this piece literally said, you know, the piece that I'm writing is dealing with centering my body as a riot and the right to explosion in relationship to intersubjective blackness and the refusal of the silhouette. So these are a lot of different things that I'm trying to like cross and push up on the intersections of. And I'm just going to take line by line what I mean or what I'm thinking about in approaching these. You know, the body as a riot. I've mentioned this a few times in some presentations when people are actually thinking about my various identities and how I show up in particular rooms, and what, and more specifically, what they exactly want me to process through my body for them. So the idea of riot for me, the idea of riot for me is something that is actually quite positive in regards to thinking about the various identities that I possess in my personhood, or how I walk into rooms. If you were to take the various things that I am and separate them and put them into like, you know, different people and isolate them, they would probably try to kill each other. I'm very interested in both that toxicity or that like chaos, but also very much interested in the idea of the peace and the negotiation that I possess internally in the day-to-day negotiations of who people see me to be, and who I and how I kind of come to this kind of like particular kind of formulaic processing of how I want to show up as all these things at once, without like making any other identities suffer. The idea when in thinking about explosion, which is very specific because I was not interested in ideas around implosion. You know, I'm not interested in ideas around like nihilism, and specifically Black nihilism. I'm thinking about what it means to push out certain kind of aspects of the toxicity that, or the forced combination of identities that people would like to try to minimalize their interactions with me by. And so oftentimes I think about this in like, you know, bomb formulas, or how one can be kind of handled preciously or also be handled inappropriately. The language that I have been writing over the last couple of years as I invest in a particular kind of practice is one that is thinking about creating the language that I want my body to be figured with. As I'm throwing out ideas around identity, as someone who identifies as a Black queer dyke, who engages in, you know, BDSM practices, but BDSM practices in the sense of thinking outside of ideas around particular engagements with race or race play, more into submission and dominance, and how there's a certain kind of, you know, sovereignty and a feeling of freedom and power within that. I think what has come up with that is the refusal to kind of fall in line with ideas of descriptors or ideas of placement of where I can be or cannot be. You know, the area of kink, you know, in general, and especially with this particular text that I'm trying to figure, is something that's thinking about pushing these ideas of identity all the way to the bend. As someone who engages in kink and who's someone seen as kinky, what it means to kind of really try to push that in an area that it crosses all of those things. The You know, the refusal of the silhouette, and I'm kind of working through this pretty fast because the silhouette has been something that uh, really came up to the forefront, and I've been trying to figure out how to approach this idea because when I bring up ideas of silhouette, I'm thinking about how I am figured whenever I walk into the room, and how that kind of static flatness is something that I'm immediately and always trying to uh, 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 refuse, and also like trying to kind of like fight for this particular kind of you know, more nuanced read and more nuanced engagement in all places that I find myself walking into. I feel like silhouetting as a practice, and when I say silhouetting, especially in thinking about Blackness, is when you are kind of just defined by the color of your skin, and there's like a kind of a flatness that creates this kind of denial of nuance into subjective identity and affirmation. So, you know, and thinking very much about the theme of like, you know, the consent of the governed, or thinking about ideas of nation state, there has to me, and many times been applied this false and very highly politicized and, you know, kind of ruinous idea of a flat image that can be put together as and lumped in one,
Ram,
which is where you
we
get
need a
these.
present.
Hello?
Sorry, we
Which is
were just
where
at the
I
presentation.
Okay. Which is where we can, you know, start to think about the ways that I think people are, in the ways that we are thinking about how people are denied a particular kind of like subjectivity, and also denied a certain kind of way to create and speak from their own particular identities. For me, the silhouetting practice has been something that is not in anything that I have purposely tried to engage with, but something that I find myself having to fight against, you know, more often than not, in areas of discussion around who I am or who I might be, or in discussions around the lumping and the, you know, very oppressive flattening and grouping of how everyone should be seen together without any kind of like, you know, identity outside of that. Some of the ways that I have tried to address this within my own practice is to kind of confront this by presenting images that could possibly be read as silhouette, but also talk about the necessary reads to kind of read into a depth or a layering of what exactly is happening by kind of leaning close into this kind of like Blackness, but thinking about the reveals that come from those layers that kind of obscure certain features. What does it mean to, you know, carry a particular identity politic, or just a flat out politic that can be read on your body without you saying anything? What does it mean to come out by leading with everything that would highlight that? You know, the idea of submission and dominance within oneself, outside of the larger context of you know, government ideas around, I think nation building and things like that. For me, it's been very, very powerful to try to figure out and actually work through ideas of the way that ideas of how I am showing up in places outside of any kind of gaze, whether that be another person who shares similar identities, or whether it be a particular kind of white gaze. How do I show up in these rooms, and how do I think about the things that I want to push myself to do? And how can I allow ideas of around my BDSM practice to interact in my own solitude, which is something that I have had to really engage with within this last year due to the pandemic. So, the again, to lean back on some of the images that you all are seeing, especially with the Brad Johnson project, which is some of the images of those are up right now. That's a project where I actually found myself or allowed myself to go into a consistent mode of doming oneself for the to get closer to the proximity of the thing that I was extraordinarily fearful of within a controlled context. What came out of that is a certain kind of new development of language that kind of traverses something that is legible in terms of like its textual engagement, but more in terms of a particular kind of a sensual or haptic engagement, which is something again that I'm very interested in leading with. I think in this particular text, oddly, as I'm writing, how do I deal with sensory aspects of power? How do I deal with sensory aspects of submission? And how do I deal with sensory aspects of dominance? So these are all the things that I'm kind of trying to crisscross and create within this text. Again, this is very, very timely for me because of the reality of what these last 4 years have been and what the years before that have been, but very much about like, where do I stand on the other side of these things? Because this particular body of work that I'm sharing with you takes place in this kind of like, 4-year period. So this text I am producing is something that I am using as a way to synthesize and bring a concise argument with and against myself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tiona, for sharing this glimpse into the ways that you're thinking about this text. I'm very excited to see how it corresponds to the different conversations coming up in the publication and the rest of our texts. Coming up next, we invite Dhrubo Jyoti to share some of their thoughts. Dhrubo Jyoti is a Delhi-based journalist who writes on affairs at the intersection of caste and sexuality. Dhrubo, the space is yours.
Thank you. Just to introduce myself, and before I do that, I just wanted to thank all of you for this fantastic event and conversation, and it's been a real treat to be able to be here and listen to all of you. My name is Dhrubo. I identify as a Dalit non-binary person. I work as a journalist with a newspaper based in New Delhi, and as Shaunak very kindly mentioned, I work on politics at the intersection of caste and sexuality. In my work for Consent of the Governed, I wanted to look at love, especially at the question of dignity, KINK and the Constitution. I come from this from a perspective of a Dalit person, and this is where my presentation for today is also based on. And I think I would kind of just start with talking about what caste is in India, right? And just to be broadly aware that the caste system is a system of segregation, where Dalit people are at the very bottom, right? But at the very bottom also means that there are close to 300 million people who are at the very bottom of this thing, who have suffered for millennia in terms of very basic lack of dignity and respect, right? Who have dealt with questions of untouchability, and this is where I actually wanted to start, right? To start with the Indian Constitution, which, when adopted on the 26th of January 1950, formally prohibits, outlaws untouchability, and untouchability being a practice where upper castes or forward caste people think that our bodies are far too impure for them to even touch. for them to share water with us, for them to share food, for them to even share our shadows, right? Especially with this dim lighting that surrounds me, that's especially eerie for me to talk about. And that's section 17 of the Indian Constitution, which says untouchability is abolished and its practice in any form is forbidden. The enforcement of any disability arising out of untouchability shall be an offense punishable in accordance with the law. My work actually wanted to take off from this, from the abolishment of untouchability of Dalit people, and to see what this has done to the caste system, but more specifically to the question of desire, romance, love, and dignity. In this respect, I thought I would take us through what has happened in the last 6 years through two love stories involving two Dalit people. I start in 2014 when a young 18-year-old woman named Kausalya meets a 19-year-old, and the person to the left of this photograph is Shankar, who is a Dalit person who was 20 years old at the time, and the person to the right is Kausalya, who is 18 years old at the time, and the legal age for marriage in India is of course 18. And this is a photograph from 2015. So Kausalya and Shankar meet at an engineering college in their first year of studying. They're on the college bus that drops them from the college back to their homes. And on the first day of college, Shankar comes up to Kausalya, introduces himself, and asks her name. Right? And so she kind of refuses to respond to him. He does this a second day, and he's deeply respectful, and she's intrigued by his presence. So she starts talking to him. In 6 months, they kind of start getting together. They go out. They develop a relationship with each other. But what also happens is that Kausalya comes, and the person in the photo is Kausalya, this time from 2017. Kausalya comes from a caste that's higher than Shankar's, right? So her parents try everything. They try to abduct her, they beat her up, they abuse her, they abuse him. But yet in 2016, the couple decide to get married and move away from their village. What then happens is that in March 2016, Shankar, who's the Dalit person in the story, gets a job, right? And because he gets a job, Kausalya decides to buy him a new shirt because it's his first day at work and she wants him to look good. So they travel to the nearby town to buy a shirt for him. They buy the shirt, get out of the shop, and walk to the nearest bus stand to take a bus back to their village. What they don't know is at the bus stand, Kausalya's family and goons that they've hired are waiting for them. They hack Shankar to pieces. They strike several blows on Kausalya. She barely survives and he bleeds to death on the street. The whole incident is captured in a traffic camera. Right? If you can move to the next slide, that's marked 2017. Shortly after this, if you can go to the slide where Kausalya is on a motorbike. In 2017, Kausalya, I traveled to an undisclosed location because at this time Kausalya was under witness protection because she turned against her family. Right? And after the death of Shankar, she kind of became this deep recluse person. She refused to do anything. She filed a case against her family. And when we met, she's not conversant in English, but the only thing that she wanted to talk about was how she was not afraid, right? How the death of her husband, who was Dalit, had rid of her the fear of caste, right? And that I thought was deeply instructive, especially for me, because one of the ways in which caste tries to shackle love is through fear. In 2018, Kausalya finally gets over the shock of her husband being killed in front of her, and she marries another man, a man called Sakti. Right? At the ceremony, they don't do the traditional Hindu marriage ceremony. Instead, what they do is a form of marriage known as a self-respect marriage, where that is shorn of Hindu religious customs. It doesn't have a high caste priest, and it doesn't have the chanting of Hindu religious hymns. They also mark their wedding by playing the parai. The parai being a traditional drum that comes from Tamil Nadu that uses the skin of the cow, which is why it's considered impure and can only be used by Dalit people. Right? The reason that this case and these two people have stayed with me is not only because of what happened to them, but it also very instructively showed us what happens to, if we can move to the next slide, that's marked 2018. Thank you. This is a still from their marriage that we took, where she is playing the parai, which is the drum that's used by Dalit people. The reason that this case stayed with me is not only because of the two very extraordinary people who were part of it, but also because it showed to us what happens to Dalit people where they dare to love despite the constitution being present. In 2019, if we can move to the next slide, I met another young man, this time in India's largest state of Uttar Pradesh, Abhishek Pal. I met him shortly before he was burned to death by his girlfriend's family. Again, Abhishek being a Dalit person and the girlfriend being a person from a higher caste. On September 14, 2019, Abhishek's mother fell ill and they had to drive her to the nearest hospital. Because the family came from a lower middle class background and they were a low income family of farmers, Abhishek, being the eldest son, was asked to go back home to get money for the hospitalization. When Abhishek reached home, his girlfriend, who came from a higher caste called Shivani, sent him a message on his phone saying, "Can you come meet me?" He walked over to her house and they spent about 5 minutes talking when the woman's high caste parents got hold of them, locked him up in a room and set the room on fire. When police found him the next morning, he was badly charred and they wheeled him back to the same hospital that his mother was admitted in the previous night. When I met his family, they told me about how his brother and father were tending to the mother when they saw his charred body being wheeled into the same hospital. He died later that day, and his mother suffered a severe shock and she died the next day. If we could move to the next slide. And this is from last year when in his house, in Abhishek's house, they're performing a traditional ritual that marks his death, where women of the family come together. And remember that in India, death is a deeply casted issue where Dalit people are not allowed in the burial grounds of higher caste people, and where Dalit people are often not given a decent, dignified burial. So this is a deeply affective moment for the family. But this is also an important moment because 2020 is also the year when Shankar's killers are let go. They are all acquitted by the High Court because of lack of evidence, right? So 4 years after one of the most gruesome cases of caste-based hate crime that India has seen, we see that the people who perpetrated this violence and were caught on camera doing it are let go by the judiciary because the Indian administrative and judicial machinery can simply find not enough evidence. And the reason that I wanted to talk to you about these two cases and tell you the history of the last 6 years through this is because it is an incredible loss of people that is happening at such an alarming rate that we are just, I mean, even as a journalist, right, we are just unable to even go back to the people, to ask their families, to stand by them. We are unable to think of the two Dalit men who died. We are unable to think of the little things that Shankar and Abhishek liked, their stories, their dreams, their families. Shankar, for example, loved Tamil film songs. Abhishek loved to play cricket, and he loved red T-shirts. We are unable to mark their anniversaries, and this loss of our young men, women, and queer folk at the hands of not just the state, but at the hands of a caste society is so debilitating that we use every piece available before us. We use gore, we want to use shock, sensation, sensationalism, just to get other people to register the pain of losing people. And this is a tragedy that's caused not just by caste, but its incredible power of hate. And the reason that I thought of this when I started thinking about kink and the Constitution is because, as a Dalit person, to me, there is no greater kink, there is no greater way to think of love, desire than dignity. Because so many of us as Dalit people simply do not know that life. Right? That how the same constitution that bans untouchability and the same document that opens up the possibility of equal opportunity and respect, for example, as Vidisha mentioned, for example, for queer people, right, with the Navdev Johar judgment in 2018 that decriminalizes homosexuality, how that same document is also limited by society, right, and a society that's diseased by caste. And this, in fact, we see also in the way in which, for example, as a queer person, the movement for LGBTQIA freedom goes in India, right? Where a movement that was based primarily on the question of liberation has now conveniently shifted to a question of respectability, right? So, are you respectable enough as an Indian queer person to have rights, to be decriminalized, right? And so what we are saying is that as Dalit queer people, respectability means our deaths, right? And I just want to end with a quote that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar spoke at a speech shortly before he died, where he speaks about the 26th of January 1950 when the Indian Constitution was adopted. Dr. Ambedkar says, we are going to enter into a life of contradictions. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we will be recognizing the principle of one man and one vote and one value. In our social and economic life, we shall continue to deny the principles of one man, one value. How long shall we continue to live this life of contradictions? For the Dalit people of India, that life of contradiction continues to exist. And I hope that through this publication and through this work, we're able to think of what it means, or maybe we're able to imagine in future, what it means for Dalit people to fall in love and live a life of dignity. Thank you.
So much love, Dhrubo, for that tender sharing. We're, I think, all grateful for that you're persistently bringing these stories to light, no matter how difficult they are to share. Thank you. We're really looking forward to reading on these topics that you will expand. Next up, we invite to share the incredible edible Aquinos. The incredible edible Aquinos is a multidimensional performer stripper influenced by African dance, the Black diaspora, pop music, and the wild women spirit of sex workers. Aquinos' work is about upending the patriarchy and settling her own terms on what it means to be a woman in a Black body. Pronouns are sir, whore, sex worker, the, thou, thine, goddess, bitch, it, black, king, the vagina. It's all for you, Aquinos.
You can also just call me she. That's that whole pronoun thing is kind of a joke, but yeah. So I just want to first say that I am thoroughly exhausted. Um, I have been burning the candle at both ends as I'm trying to finish up grad school. So if you see me here yawning, it's not you. I just been up way too early. I've been up since like 5 o'clock in the morning, so I need a nap. Um, yeah. So I've got, I'm listening to everyone's presentation, and as usual, I am thoroughly unprepared. Welcome to my life, because I've been staying up trying to finish the grad school program. But oddly enough, I know how to wing it really well. So listening to these presentations and going with the theme, I was like, oh, I've got something that I just wrote at, whatever time I went to bed last night. Actually, I finished writing it at 5 o'clock this morning. So yay me. So, when we're thinking about like kink and governing bodies, there's a lot of themes in there around medical apartheid, which is kind of sort of in the realm of the things that I'm studying right now. I had to do a critical essay, one of 45 that's due by Friday. Wish me luck. In this particular essay, I was talking about the HIV 2020 conference and the film festival, Not Your Rescue Project, which was a curated festival that included a lot of work from different artists around the globe, um, that surrounding sex workers' rights and so on. So we were able to present um, different films where I did like burlesque, and there was a tribute to Lorena Brojas, which is a trans activist in New York, and she died earlier this year of COVID-19. And I had to go in there and I had to kind of reflect on a lot of the things that were happening there. So I reflected on COVID-19. And strangely, history repeats itself, right? So, as a lot of us know, the main group that's being affected right now by the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly in the United States, is Black people. So, according to some sources, Black people are 3 times more likely than any other ethnic group to suffer to suffer from COVID because of a lot of pre-existing conditions that we end up having. A lot of those things are dealing with gut health, um, your lung health, and all those wonderful things that we need to take care of when we're young that we don't for a lot of reasons. I was watching a video by a performer today by the name of Torlisha, who made a statement where I'm going to have to reflect on her video later for my other 43 essays that need to be done. And she said that the pre-existing condition for Black people is white supremacy. And I could not agree more. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to just read to you. I'm going to bore you to death with this unedited piece that I wrote, finished writing at 5 o'clock this morning, I kid you not, and sent it over to my editor about COVID, sex workers, and just that whole intersectional issue of class and medical discrimination that happens throughout the world. And just as a disclaimer, Vidisha, I know you watch a lot of my crazy Instagram videos, and recently I did write a video, did do a video where I was talking about the COVID thing, and people just won't get the fuck off of me inside the grocery stores, and they just need to shut this down. But one of the things that I did not do, I need to do another video. I did not talk explicitly about how fucked up the healthcare system is. So it's like very easy to blame people and say, stay away, wear your mask, wash your hands. But really at the core, what COVID revealed was that the healthcare system's got a problem. Right now in LA, in the United States, they are running out of oxygen, right? So and what 3 people in LA are they are being affected by COVID. Like, it's really ridiculous in the United States. So while it's easy to be like, yeah, each individual can do their part, really and truly what COVID is trying to show you is there's a problem with this infrastructure and it needs to be fixed. And this is not something that's new. This is something that's been going on for a long time. And this is why a lot of us, including myself, are just like, vaccine? Really? No, I'll pass. Well, I mean, I'm not going to pass because I need to go on a vacation, honey, because this is really gloomy out here in Berlin and I'm way over it. All right. So let me just start with my little 5-page shenanigans that I wrote this morning. And I'm going to open it up with a quote from a book that I cannot wait to read once I start doing this grad school stuff. And it's called Medical Apartheid. So, I went to the book randomly yesterday, because this is when I started writing it. And I was like, let me just open this to a page and figure out where I can start. I'm sure I can start anywhere and to start doing a bibliographical quote from this book. And this is where it opened up. It's an advertisement. Wanted, 50 Negroes. Any person having sick Negroes considered incurable by their respectable physicians and wishing to dispose of them. The highest cash prize will be paid upon application as above. And this is from the 1830s, and it provides historical evidence as to how Black people have been used by the medical system and discarded. The medical field has served as a theater for our bodies, violating our rights, experimented on to create treatments for many illnesses, then subsequently not being allowed access to those treatments. While modern times allows more access to medicine and treatments in the first world landscape, pandemics such as COVID-19 offers insight into just how flawed our healthcare system is. But who still suffers most during these crises? Black people. With Black people 3 times more likely than whites to catch coronavirus, and 4 times as many Black women diagnosed with HIV other than Latin or white women. These alarming statistics illustrate not only the racial disparities that exist in the medical system and within the human rights landscape as a whole, but the distrust that Black people have, and rightfully so, towards modern healthcare systems. So a lot of the reasons why Black people are not getting diagnosed or getting treatment for health issues is not just because when they go to the doctor they have to deal with racism, but they don't want to go because there's no trust there. I engaged with 3 films which appear in part of the HIV 2020 conference. The film festival Not Your Rescue Project, films from sex worker rights movement, featured on-screen performances created by sex workers. Through performance, fiction, and documentaries from a variety of genres and countries, this film covers topics ranging from pressing public health issues such as HIV/AIDS, COVID-19, and police violence to discriminatory anti-trafficking crusades, pleasure, and porn. Whether it is by taking to the streets in protest, delivering vital services to our fellow workers, or reclaiming our stories and our lives, sex workers are transforming communities and making our voices heard. The structural discrimination in healthcare doesn't stop at race. It continues within the biases of labor, undermining what is perceived as work, who is worthy of labor protection, deserving of fair pay, and other considerations which are often reserved for the upper working class systems. Within the context of COVID-19, the layers continue to be pulled back, revealing antiquated ideas on the sex worker population. Accusations of posing a risk to public health, COVID-19 has been used as a justification to threaten the sex worker community with unsubstantiated claims, financial disempowerment, and reductive ideas geared at turning back the clock on legal frameworks which sex workers rely on for safety and prosperity. The 2020 HIV conference allowed sex workers a platform to create conversations through these films which dissect and engage in narratives around health and work in the digital space. This space was created as a result to the protest against the International AIDS Society, IAS, which was more concerned about scientific approaches to AIDS research, thus viewing the communities that they were researching as subjects and objects of their research. There was already tension within the privileged party and these communities, a direct result of discrimination of people living with HIV/AIDS and being banned from entering the United States. In 2012, IAS decided to have their conference in Washington, D.C. to celebrate the United States lifting restrictions on travel for people with HIV. There was still the anti-prostitution pledge, which positioned sex workers as crime of mortal fortitude. Restrictions around the corona pandemic forced the conference to happen in the digital space. In the US, the same country where sex work is heavily criminalized, and the conference has been held multiple times. Under the Obama administration, drug users and sex workers were banned from entering the US. Eventually, drug users were allowed, but of course, not sex workers. Sex workers remain a topic of great scrutiny in conversations around health strategies. Meanwhile, US sex worker groups get less than 1% of global HIV funding, which would give them access to lead research and strategies. This creates a barrier for sex worker-led groups to do research which could shift the ideas and laws. Under COVID-19, sex workers who aren't seen as a protected class or the work considered to be a profession have been left out of financial relief, leaving them in the awkward position of violating social distancing rules in order to stay afloat during the pandemic. In my film, Subliminal Messages, which appears as part of the festival, I uncover some of these factoids. In this 2-minute and 27-second performance, I tackle these themes on healthcare, structural racism, and the discrimination of sex workers. Dedicated to the architect of rock and roll, singer Little Richard, much like sex workers who are not given enough credit for their contributions made in human rights activism, Little Richard was not given enough credit for his contributions to this musical genre. At the time Richard died in May of 2020, the global pandemic was still in the beginning phases, with restrictions on travel locally and internationally, and businesses were closed. This forced live performances to go online, doing an online format, turning their living room into a stage and a recording studio for nightlife entertainers. Overnight, we had to become video professionals, tackling every aspect of creating digital content, from sound and light to graphic design. Moving online was unfortunately was not that easy for sex workers who were prohibited from working. If caught, fines range from hundreds of thousands. In decriminalized climates like Berlin, it would be like €500 per infraction. And in the countries like Australia, it could be up to 5,000 Australian dollars. Additionally, in countries like India and Rwanda, where the work was prohibited under Corona, or clients became scarce as a result of travel restrictions and curfews, the lockdowns would also impact right groups that offered essential health services to their communities. Sexual minorities forced off treatments due to the stay-at-home orders, despite some government and NGO efforts to try and help them. During my performance, and I'm going to close out with this because of course I don't have the video available for you all. During my performance in my film, different captions appear on the screen, serving as a concealer for any part of my body that could be interpreted as lewd by the platform Twitch, which many of us were using to stream shows. Violation to any of their nudity terms could mean we would not have a platform to stream our shows and make money. This in turn made the performance appear more obscene than it actually was. And I'm so sorry that I don't have that video. I could link you to it, but it's kind of like too late. If you see it, I'm dancing to this song Lucille by Little Richard, and anytime I do anything, it's just blurred out, and it looks like it's so nasty. But in actuality, I'm kind of fully clothed. But there's a lot of like intersectional dialogue going on in there, from the healthcare disparities to the anti-sex worker narratives to even the performance aspect of it, where we're like being censored and governed. Our bodies are being governed. Is that the noise where it says "shut up, Aquinos"? Is that what that's saying? Aquinos, shut your mouth. I think that's what that is.
Not at all. Please go on.
Okay. I can share my video some other time, but that really is just like a reflection paper that I'm just reflecting on this video as well as the video of Lorena Brojas, who actually died in March of 2020 of, guess what? COVID-19. That's all I've got to say right now.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're gonna go to after party collective presentation. Can we have the video, please? Thank you, Rana. to speak now. We are making some of these upcoming points keeping in mind that those present acknowledge that gender is self-identification and no measures of proof should be requested upon this self-identification. We all acknowledge that the English language denies the holding of the genders we embody and positioning within the language, and then procedurally within the judiciary is limiting. In case of India, using the word trans, the legal papers for fights against oppressions of various genders and intersex persons homogenizes context and precarity. If citizenship is to allow for one to participate indiscriminately in public life, then such citizenship is not provided to all. Social structures of race and caste apply to these public interactions, where untouchability and stigma is not uncommon. Any form of violence done onto a Dalit body is a caste-based violence. Any form of violence done onto a femme body is a caste-based violence. We suggest that the caste system in India also translates into gender sociability legally as well as socially towards the transgender community. The Transgender Persons Protections of Rights Act was passed by the Parliament in November 2019 and came into force in January 2020. The Act offers for the right to self-perceived gender identity while making mandates for the state to survey and screen our bodies. It medicalizes gender and seeks evidence of surgery, also sets up structural requirements of housing and to obtain identity certification. It also doesn't differentiate between adult and children and recognition of kinships other than blood family. Not providing any rights of dignity, it even minimizes the violence unto a trans body over that of a cis body by applying short-term punishment to the violator. This in no way supports the long-term punishment of such prison system, but is only stated to illustrate the prejudice of law towards a trans person. This act does not provide any provisions for the means of livelihood, education, housing, jobs, healthcare, etc. It even goes against all prior judgments that were favorable to the movement towards gender rights. In their civil writ petition filed against this act in Feb 2020, Grace Banu, Vaijanti Vasanta Mowgli, KMV Mona Lisa, Anindya Hajra, and Sira Santosh versus the Union of India, Ministry of Law and Justice and the Ministry of Social Justice, petitioned for the striking of some sections and implementations of directions the court in the National Legal Services Authority versus Union of India 2014, the Nalsa judgment, to provide reservations to transgender persons. There is proposal for horizontal reservations that take into account the intersection of caste and gender identity. Grace Banu Ganeshan versus the state of Tamil Nadu and others petition seeks the implementation of horizontal reservation for transgender and intersex persons under a transgender/women category and not under the most backward classes category. This would be similar to reservations provided for women and persons with disabilities, which would ensure that transgender persons who come from marginalized caste groups need not give up their caste status as reservations. Further, in her letter from 2016 to the President and Prime Minister of India, Grace Banu writes, "The bill which your Social Justice and Empowerment Ministry is eager to introduce says that we should not beg involved in sex work for livelihoods and cannot seek protection from the transgender community. At the same time, the bill does not provide reservation for us in education and work. If such a bill is passed, we realize that we'll have no option to survive instead of pushing us to nothing. It is far better for us to die. So please euthanize us." Shaunak, over to you.
As part of our critique of the Trans Act, we went back to the text of the Nalsa judgment of April 2014 to remind our collective selves of the power of an affirmative state body and the profoundly different language it can produce when those in power create directives that speak to the experiences of the most disadvantaged amongst us. The judgment came in response to a case filed by the National Legal Services Authority in the Supreme Court of India, and is still considered a landmark judgment because it unconditionally allows for the self-determination of gender, including a non-binary identity, as well as directs central and state governments to make provisions for reservations in educational and employment opportunities for trans people. One of the pieces of language from this judgment that we use as a leaping board is the fundamental right to those aspects which make life meaningful. The bench derives this from Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, which says No person should be deprived of his life or personal liberty, end quote. The bench reads this further as an imperative to protect the dignity of human life. Dhrubo has already elucidated the value of dignity for many lives, and thinking with them and building on After Party Collective's body of work, one of the aspects of dignity that we're keen to examine is the interplay of intimacies. As people occupying gender dissident identities, intersecting as well with identities marginalized by caste, race, lineage, language, and others, which has resulted in upbringings often divorced from the feeling of belonging in majoritarian society. We are keenly aware of the importance of intimacies. Those that create the spaces to fully express and embody our multiplicous selves. Friend, lover, parent, sibling, guide, antagonist, advocate, all converge in the few people who can actually see us as whole and magnificent, while continuously picking up our broken, detonating pieces. I want to here read out a quote from Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, where he cautions against the separation of intimate relations. Start quote. Lack of free and equitable intercourse, which springs from a variety of shared interests, makes intellectual stimulation unbalanced. Diversity of stimulation means novelty, and novelty means challenge to thought. The more activity is restricted to a few definite lines, as it is when there are rigid class lines preventing adequate interplay of experiences, the more action tends to become routine on the part of the class at a disadvantage, and capricious, aimless, and explosive on the part of the class having the materially fortunate position. End quote. In the context of race, constitution, and kink, we're also drawn to further read these quests of meaning and intimacy through the powerful words of Audre Lorde. In the essay Uses of the Erotic, Lorde writes, "For the erotic is not a question only of what we do. It is a question of how acutely and fully we are feeling. Once we know the extent to which we are capable of feeling that sense of satisfaction and completion, we can then observe which of our various life endeavors bring us closest to that fullness." Viewing these words through a lens of transness, a continuous array of arrivals and departures, a constantly shifting state of becoming, what would this sense of completion look like if it was mirrored, yet not negated, by a sense of flowing? In this, we're interested in knowing intimacies that are constituted outside of a static regulation of government and governed, that allow for a continuous, enthusiastic, affirmative assignment of these roles as and when they are desired, but that also allow us to sink into the howling crevices of self-flagellation when it is needed, while knowing that the rescue chopper is not too far away. We have already been broken by casteist, heterosis normative families, friends, and lovers. So the desires that break our skin perform acts of putting us back together. And together we swim in and out of labels, their hegemonic nets unable to hold the distance between us. We look for an intimacy that is constituted outside of definition, for no words are vast enough to hold the worlds we co-vision. I'm thinking of the euphoria when you see me in all the shades of the setting sun striking the moving water, present and immaterial. I'm thinking of the euphoria when you see me in all the stars of the night sky, future and impermanent, moving in all directions at once. That's it from our sharing. I think you're on mute, Vi.
I'm sorry. I was saying thank you, Shaunak. And I've cried over that so many times. But thanks, Dhrubo. Thanks, Tiona. Thanks, Akynos. Thanks for also holding space for us and our emotions. Yeah, I don't know if we actually have time for discussion now, since it's already 1.5 hours, is it?
I think it's I would like to maybe ask our contributors if they have any thoughts after hearing each other's presentations, if there's something that arises from these ways of coming together. Is there something further to share?
Yeah, I am just very thankful to hold this space with all of you. I was really locked in and engaged with all of the presentations, and very, very much thinking about how we are coming from our respective locations and lived presence and identities, and how these things, like, tend to find these intersections with each other. It's also affirmed very much about, I guess, very much the feeling that I have around, engaging in these more international dialogues, so that we can actually be able to hear each other and talk about the things that we feel that we may have been experiencing in isolated kind of territories. So it's just been very eye-opening and very affirming around the need to pursue more dialogue outside of what is immediately available, within my own like social circle and within my own art practice as well. So thank you all for being so vulnerable and for sharing these things. And I'm very excited to dig deeper about what I am actually formulating in terms of the writing for the publication.
Thanks, Tiona. Dhrubo, do you want to share something?
I just wanted to thank you all and everybody for just enriching. Like, these last 90 minutes have been deeply immersive. I mean, not just in terms of learning, because that's a word that's easily thrown around, but also in terms of just seeing and I mean, just understanding, looking at all these different places that we're coming from. It's been just really enriching for me.
I am super happy. And it's amazing because it's really been, it's really interesting because, people talk about different kind of legal lenses. Aquinos, do you want to share something before I go forward?
Yeah, no, I'm gonna have to go because there's no water in my house.
Okay.
And I don't know why
I
it's
hope that works
4:35,
then.
but no water. So, no, I really loved it.
Okay.
I would like to, well, surprise, surprise, I'm going to be writing about this whole presentation for my 45 reflective essays. So I will be looking into everyone and trying to get back to what you were saying, because sometimes the connection wasn't so clear for me and I got kicked off. But thank you for this space and this time. I really appreciated these this information and these perspectives and these intersecting narratives. I'm gonna go find out why the hell there's no water in my house.
Thank
Go
you
put
so
out that
much.
fire. Thank you
I
all.
hope
I'll
it
see you
was.
soon. Okay.
Thank you, Aquinos.
Bye. Thank you.
Unfortunately, I have to
Yeah.
go to. Very sorry
Okay.
for this, and I wanted to stay longer.
Thank you so much, Dhrubo. Thanks for your time and thanks for sharing.
Thank you,
Every
and thank you
time
to
new
all
stories with
great,
connecting.
for this great time. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, it's been fascinating. Legalities or social whatever constructions like of different identities, but how the idea of a kinkster or like kinkster feels almost queer within the queer identity as well, because it almost gets commodified as if as BDSM, or gets commodified as fetish objects, and always kind of
Mm-hmm.
starts to get represented as paraphernalia, while kink is not about that at all. It has
Mm-hmm.
kink does not need paraphernalia. Kink is a behavioral thing. Kink is it's like a personal identity, and it can derive and it's about how a person derive meanings out of life, and sometimes any kind of interpersonal relationship for a kinkster are nothing but that. uh, so I think this is why the idea of thinking of legal frameworks, and therefore also through the idea of kink was important, because we do think of other identities, but also the question of colonialism was important, because constitution basically was something that kind of came post this kind of British independence from like a lot of the colonies, and like during World War II and all of that. Like, so, but the nation state itself was also a colonial project, and it is not like all countries do not acknowledge it as a colonial project, because some people became sovereign republics, like the United States and India, but countries like Australia, Canada still remain under the British monarchy, and the monarchy still has
Mm-hmm.
rights and control over it. And that's exactly why, with the Indigenous people movement in Australia, we see that they don't want to participate in parliamentary democracy, because they say that if I do participate in it, then it is that I am saying that I want to be colonized by the nation state, which is the similar in context of Kashmir in India, where the Kashmiri freedom fight is that I do not want to participate in the parliamentary democracy, because um, I want to, but not. I don't want to be colonized by the nation state of India. So those are just the reasons and why the curatorial frame happened. And Shaunak has supported me through these last 4 years that I've known them, and also every day in COVID. And yeah, thank you, Shaunak. Maybe it's your moment to share something.
Thank you so much for constantly opening up spaces and making these beautiful connections and inviting us all into these ways of thinking. I'm very glad that we had this opportunity to share in together, some of our thoughts in relation to before we start fully fleshing out our writing, because I feel like so many rich connections have come out in terms of thinking about a thread in thinking about ourselves as multiplicous beings and the different kinds of aspects that we choose to put out and to want to be seen through. Also looking at the ways in what all gets lost when there is a lack of trust or a lack of infrastructure for people within, whether it's in terms of medical infrastructure or legal or police infrastructure, and what really gets lost, or it continues into academic and other kinds of state infrastructures. What all facets of people get lost that we cannot then hold and cannot enrich us further. And I think being able to see that, I think it's really enriching and continues this sort of enthusiastic excavation into ourselves in writing these pieces. So I'm just really grateful for everybody and for taking our time, for being here, as well as for putting together thoughts as we go towards this publication. Thank you also to Andrea and the whole team that has made this possible and allowed us to have this kind of resources, to have this space and time. Yes, feeling very enriched, like everybody said, feeling joyous at the sharing.
Good. Good. Again, I'm very, very excited to take a lot of the thoughts that came up to help really work out some language that I've been dancing around for literally 4 years. So it's a good directive to figure out how to bring all these different thoughts together, because I mean the challenge of course is to match the very things that I was talking about the complicated and the chaotic ideas around identity that can exist in one. So the challenge to try to figure out how to successfully articulate that within a text is a great challenge for right now, because I think it's been sitting long enough. So very, very excited to have been in conversation with you all in this format, and looking forward to having a certain kind of locked in conversation through the means of the actual written publication. I think it's super important.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for sharing and making the work that you have been over years. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I think if anyone has questions, please feel free to write over the YouTube archive, which I think is going to be available. And I think, I look forward. So the publication is going to come up in February 2021, which is also going to come up finally along with the Soil to Soil Meals publication as well. And we'll be very happy to share that with you in digital formats. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Debbie,
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
that.